See Beneath Your Beautiful podcast is raw and intimate, sometimes funny, and always entertaining. With new episodes every Saturday, Hara explores our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness. Today we are interviewing Alyssa Twist Light. Alyssa, would you mind introducing yourself?
I actually just go by Twist. And so I am here because you've asked me to talk about a topic that a lot of people shy away from, but have a lot of questions about. And I hope that this is a wonderful conversation for everyone who's listening.
Yeah. So you foster teens, is that right?
So I had a foster for 2 years, starting when she was 16. And that was a number of years ago when I was single. And then a couple of years ago, my partner and I had 2 tween boys.
Oh, okay.
And they aren't with us anymore, but after COVID, we will be able to see them again and they will be able to come and spend time with us.
Oh, awesome. And how did that get started, you fostering?
So the first time that I did it, it wasn't through the foster care system. I use the term foster because it's easier for people to understand. And also because I don't always want to answer all sorts of questions publicly. Mm-hmm. And also there are some things that are confidential and I can't answer those.
Okay.
And so fostering is a really great word to use because it is what I did. I took in someone else's child. I cared for somebody else's child. And in the first circumstance, the funding that I had for that was very limited and didn't come from the foster care system. It came from the welfare system.
Okay.
And so that's why I use the word foster.
And you're in Canada, right?
I am in Canada.
Yeah. Is it much different in the US?
From the other foster parents that I've spoken to, yes, it's different because we have different regulations, but there are also regulations that vary state to state and province to province or to territory.
Okay.
So if you have a specific question about how it might be different, that would be easier for me to answer.
Oh, okay. I don't know anything. Well, I can say that raising 2 daughters, my vision of life was very narrow and I felt like I could only look inside my house and I couldn't take care of anybody else. And so I'm always so amazed and appreciative of people who do what you do, who go outside their own homes and want to help the world, help others. I just would love to know what inspired you to do it and what inspires you to keep doing it.
You know, I've wanted to foster for a long time. Since I was in high school, that was something that I was interested in. Originally wanted to care for kids with special needs because I actually babysat for foster families.
Oh, okay.
That had children with special needs. So some kids with cerebral palsy and autism and other congenital and genetic disorder, and some people with brain injuries as well.
Oh, wow.
And so I was always, really interested in that. And so I've always had sort of these 3 worlds, if you will, Hara. Social services, business, as in entrepreneurship specifically, and the arts. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've had the opportunity to put those things together and sometimes I haven't. But those are really the 3 sandboxes that I enjoy playing in. And so when I started, the first time that I actually had a 16-year-old girl come and live with me, she had actually been a camper at a summer camp that I was the program director at. And I later became the executive director of that camp many, many, many years later. Mm-hmm. That's where we met our boys.
Okay.
And I say our boys very affectionately. I know you're not supposed to get attached, but the reality is I am human and lots of people get attached.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that because I can own all of the things that go with it, from the excitement to the disappointment. When we met our boys, I called their worker and said, hey, we have the perfect personal counselor for them, because there were some kids who needed some extra support and they needed a one-on-one person with them. Mm-hmm. And so I had done this visit at home in advance to figure out which of our staff would be the great fit for these little guys. When I called her and said, they're really special, she said, oh, do you want to adopt them? And I said, oh, I don't know. At that point, we hadn't decided whether we were going to have children or not. And I phoned my partner and said, they're these kids. The response I got was no. And so then we started having conversations about, could we provide respite care, which is just a little relief for the family that was caring for them. Mm-hmm. We got permission to do that. We would go over to their place for like an hour or so at a time, play a board game, go for a short walk was the next sort of step. And then we were allowed to take them out for a few hours. And then we got to have them for a day. And this was all over the course of like a year and a bit. And then eventually we got to have them for overnights and then weekends. It was a wonderful transition for them. And then within a couple of months of us doing overnights, we got a call on a Monday morning that said, could you take the boys? Mm-hmm. It's an emergency. We need somewhere to put them. I got that phone call about 3 hours before I picked them up from school that day. So when I got up that morning, I wasn't going to have children. At the end of the day, I was picking kids up from school.
Oh, wow.
They stayed with us full time for a couple of months, and then they needed more care than we were able to provide. Mm-hmm. And so they went and got that help.
Awesome. One thing that I heard you say, and this is something that was in my head, that, it's not that the foster kids' fault sometimes. In my mind, I think troubled teen, which is interesting. When you said that, I never thought troubled home.
Yeah.
I thought troubled teen. So that's so interesting to me that I have a bias or a judgment based on nothing.
I'm going to interrupt you because it's not based on nothing. It's based on the things that we see on the news, the things that we assume because of movies that we've seen, television programs, conversations. Well, they're a bad kid. They're in the system. Mm-hmm. 99% of the time, they're not in the system because they're a bad kid. Mm-hmm. They're in the system because something went wrong with their parents.
Yeah.
And we think troubled teen because that's what we hear about. We hear about older kids who need adopting. So if they're over 8, they're very unlikely to be adopted.
Okay.
And there are even in some places financial programs and incentives to have people adopt children that are over 8 years old. Mm. And when I say financial incentives, it's not about bribery or trickery or manipulation, anything gross like that. It's about, hey, we have these kids. We know that this is hard. We know that they're going to need extra support. And we can actually provide funding to help support them until they're 18.
Yeah. Yeah.
In some cases older. And of course, that always varies by area. Those are things that people need to take into consideration. And, we always think troubled teen because of the images we see. But in reality, I personally know of babies that have been taken away at birth. Mm. The hospital is instructed to call somebody from social services. Somebody will go and be there when the baby is born and take the baby and take it to a foster home if it isn't in need of immediate care, which unfortunately does happen, especially with people who are struggling with addiction and they're pregnant, and the baby is born addicted.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So that baby is a child who will grow up in the system, probably, mm-hmm. and will probably end up being the troubled teen. But they didn't start that way, and it's not their fault.
Right, of course.
Those are conversations that we need to have, and we need to reframe how we look at these kids. Because I got to tell you, if I had been through what a fraction of some of these kids that I know of have been through.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm scarred from, us moving once when I was 12.
And then we think about kids whose parents are, I will say father because of the several kids that I'm thinking of, whose fathers are pedophiles and they are still allowed to see their fathers. It doesn't mean that there aren't female pedophiles, but it's a very different statistic. And I have personally not encountered that. I think about the kids that I've worked with, kids plural, hear this plural, who have watched their parents die.
Oh my gosh.
Of an overdose, or God forbid, we had one child at our camp who had night terrors because she had seen her mother be killed by somebody else. We don't know what goes on. We don't get all the information about kids.
Right.
There was no package that we read mm-hmm. about our boys. We knew them for over a year. Can you pick the kids up from school today? Sure. We don't think about those things. We had a child in our care at some point on the journey, and I'm being very vague on purpose, who would wake me up at night or wake their staff member up at night because they didn't know that they were allowed to use the bathroom and they thought they had to ask and that they'd be in trouble for using the toilet.
Oh, wow.
And you think about the implications of that long term.
Right.
And that's not because the child is bad. That's because of something they learned. The other big part of this conversation that's really important, Hara, is that there are children who learn these things in the system, who experience these things in the system. I know of a young person who was taken advantage of sexually by the husband of the couple that was looking after her. And the wife never knew. And when she did, she turned her husband in and divorced him.
Oh, good.
And there are women who do terrible things too in the system. And there are also people who do really beautiful things.
Right.
And so I think that we need to talk about the whole spectrum and recognize that people who foster get overwhelmed, just like other parents do. And people who foster need a break, just like other parents do. And if there are other kids living in their homes, they want to connect with their children and don't want to leave another child out. Here's a great example. They want to go on a holiday even to a cottage that's a few hours away. Here's a prime example of our kids. We wanted to bring them up to our cabin, which is about 4 hours from our home. We weren't allowed to leave the region with them. Mm. So we hear these stories that we think are horrific about people who leave their foster kids at home. But in reality, they're not allowed to take them out of the region or the area or the state or, whatever. The paperwork involved in that, it is immense. And many times it's not about the foster parent saying, I don't want to do this. It's the system saying, here are the rules. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot that we don't talk about and that we need to start talking about.
What is your hope and how do we fix it? Like, what do you want to be different? What do you want to change and how do we go about doing it?
I think that one of the conversations we need to have and look at are around the studies of the implications of leaving children in a home where there isn't a lot of food. Not that there is no food, okay? Where there isn't a lot of food. Does the child need to be removed or does the parent need support in a different way so that they can provide food? Mm. Like, is that really a reason? If a parent is struggling with addiction or alcoholism, what is the extent of that? And this is not a comfortable conversation for a lot of people. But let me tell you that when people fill out forms and they're interested in adoption and they want a baby, some of the questions include how many drinks is appropriate when the mother is pregnant? What drugs will you accept that she's taken? Mm-hmm. And we need to have these conversations about uncomfortable things. And I've bounced around a little bit there. But I think what I'm looking to do here is to give your listeners a broader picture of what goes on behind the scenes, mm-hmm. because there isn't one answer for how we're going to fix this. Really, the answer is we all need to agree on a set of boundaries. I'm not going to call them rules because when we call them rules, they're hard and fast.
Right.
And, rules are meant to be broken. I want to walk up to the line. I want to whatever. Instead, I would love to see containers created where people can kind of figure out who they are inside those containers instead of who they're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And I think the system needs an overhaul. I don't know anybody even who works in the system that would disagree with that. And I think one of the biggest things that I would like to see changed, and it's actually not a change, it's an addition, is that children who are being placed for adoption, who are available for adoption, they go through a program to help them be ready to be adopted because there isn't a program. Mm-hmm. And so one of the other things that we don't talk about is the number of failed adoptions. And there's a lot of pressure and a lot of hatred and criticism and cruelty around people who, quote unquote, return their children. I don't think that people understand what happens sometimes. I mean, you think about the hoops that parents have to jump through to adopt. And when I tell you hoops, I mean, it's a circus. It's a full-on circus to become adopt ready. But we don't prepare the children. We just say, oh, you're going to go live with your new parents and it's going to be great. And some foster families do a great job of preparing their kids, but it's not consistent. There are no rules across the board. Why don't we have these rules? This is what I mean by let's create this boundary, inside, a program that we called, guess what? You're being adopted, mm-hmm. And we have different programs for different developmental ages. And we have a transition program. And we have all kinds of resources that the kids get to keep to reach out to someone if they need it. Why don't we have that?
Is that something that you want to do or you want to see be done? What is your role besides just having the heart to adopt?
So to be clear, we have chosen not to have our own children. And we've also chosen not to bring children into our home. So we will do respite and we will love on other people's children. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have learned is that I don't make a great full-time parent. Mm-hmm. I can do it for a week. I can do it for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I can take your kids for a weekend. I can be Auntie-Twist. In fact, loads of children call me Auntie-Twist. And I love that. And I really just want to sleep by myself. And I need to recharge my batteries alone. At the end of the day, I'm an introvert. And not that an introvert can't parent, and not that I'm not an outgoing person, but I really need my alone time.
I don't blame you at all. I'm so proud or happy that you know that about yourself.
Thank you.
I feel the same way. And yet I had 2 children.
I've heard from people that having your own children is different than adopting or than fostering. But interestingly, the people that say that are not the people who do both. And not to take away from people who choose to adopt, because my friends who have chosen to adopt don't see their adoptive children any differently.
Yeah.
And we have the philosophy that families come in all shapes and sizes, and they all come together in their own way. My other friends who have 2 adopted children and 2 biological children, they don't treat those children any differently. And these are people, that is one of only a couple of families that I can talk to about how I feel. Because if you have a family that's only adopted, or a family that's only fostered, or a family that's only had their own, then the perspective is limited. And I think offering advice to somebody who is interested in doing something else actually does more harm than good. Mm-hmm. Because if you have your own and love them, and tell somebody, I think I'm interested in adopting. Oh, well, you could never love them the same.
Right.
Well, if I don't have my own, I don't know that I could never love them the same because I've never had the experience of loving my own.
What I think people like you and people who adopt and people who foster, there are nurturers and there are not nurturers. And I am definitely on the spectrum of not. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was not very maternal even to my own children. And so I just love that about people who are. It's an attractive quality to me. I just appreciate you so much. What made you you? I'm asking because I'm uncomfortable. I feel bad saying it. I'm uncomfortable around things I don't understand, I guess, of people who are different than me. I'm tearing up saying it because I'm embarrassed that that's true. But I appreciate so much when you see somebody with disabilities or whatever, and you just go, you're not scared and you can just go right to them. What about your childhood, or what about your life that made you that kind of person?
So before I answer your question, I think it's really important to say that I would invite you not to feel embarrassed. I would invite you to feel courageous for asking a question that tens of thousands or millions of people are afraid to ask. I don't see you any differently. And there's nothing wrong with your question.
Thanks.
The reality is that people with disabilities are different. Mm-hmm. They're different because their brains function in different ways. And we are afraid to approach things that we don't know because we're afraid to do something wrong or look bad or look stupid or, something on that spectrum. And if we approach people like they're not a problem and we're not, I think the first thing is really like people with disabilities are not a problem. Mm-hmm. And if we approach them without pretending that there isn't something different about them, then we're ahead. Mm-hmm. Because there are people with invisible disabilities. Mm-hmm. I personally have some challenges, but most people never see them.
I see.
So I have Tourette's, mm-hmm. and my tics are worse at night. So almost the only people that see or hear them are my family.
Mm-hmm. I get that.
There's nothing wrong with me, but put me in a movie theater where the air conditioning is on. Air conditioning, like really cold air, will make me tic as well. Mm-hmm. And I drive people crazy. So we don't go to the movie theater.
Yeah. My nephew had Tourette's or has Tourette's. And, my family suffers from anxiety and depression. So I feel like that's kind of the same thing. I mean, what you're saying is that it's invisible, that you wouldn't know it to look.
Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of people who can mask. So a lot of people don't realize, part of my gift of having ADHD is that my brain moves really quickly. Mm-hmm. They don't see the behind the scenes stuff where I suffer with it going so fast. I don't know what to do next and not being able to slow it down.
I see.
When we see somebody with a disability that we can recognize, and I just want to pause for a moment, disability, special needs, different ability. I mean, no disrespect to somebody who's listening who prefers different language. And I just want to be really clear about that. But when we see somebody who very clearly is different than us, maybe it's somebody who has autism and is nonverbal and they are stimming. So they're rocking or shaking or humming or, something like that. And we're going, oh, that person's different. That's a coping mechanism for overstimulation, right? That's their calming technique. And if we look at it and go, oh, you're flapping your hand because it helps you stay calm, then suddenly you're not strange anymore. Your coping mechanism happens to be something that's really visible and noticeable. Mm-hmm. And, me sticking my hand in my pocket playing with a coin isn't.
Right.
They're not different, but I can see one. So should I say something? Should I not? Well, you don't need to say anything, right?
Right.
When we see somebody in a wheelchair and we're taught to, we should bend down to be on their height. I can't tell you, I have friends who are wheelchair users and they're like, please don't bend down. I feel like a child.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what we need to practice doing is getting comfortable asking questions. And so saying to a wheelchair user, if you're having a conversation, hey, would it be easier for you if I sat down? Oh, well, no big deal. In my experience, people say, oh my gosh, I really appreciate you asking, but I'm okay. Or, looking up all the time gets so tiring. I would just love, can we just go sit here on this picnic bench?
Yeah.
And being aware of how people's support apparatus, sorry, that one always gets me. But things like walkers, wheelchairs, AFOs, which are braces, hearing aids, we should never touch those things because they're an extension of someone's body. It helps them operate.
Mm-hmm.
If we treat people like there's nothing wrong with them, and like we just have a little more patience when we ask questions, or when we ask great questions and don't expect an answer, but just listen to what's being said, they have the experience of being heard and feeling like they belong, sometimes for the first time.
You make it sound so obvious because nothing is wrong with them.
No.
I know. I mean, once you say it like that, obviously that's true. I don't know what the fear is, I don't even know what is the fear that I have.
Are you afraid of catching something? You don't have to answer that out loud. And some people are.
No, definitely not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid I won't know what to say.
Yeah.
I took a photograph of a quadriplegic, and he was, he's wheelchair bound, obviously. And I was so nervous to take his photo. I wanted my friend to come just so that I'd have somebody there. And then it was so great once I was there, and it was so easy, and I had no problem, and I was comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And he was comfortable, but I had a real fear going in because that's why I'm saying I'm afraid of what I don't know. I think I'm afraid of something I don't know.
And we can ask. And so, another thing that we can do is be aware of how language has changed and not make someone wrong.
Oh, yeah.
I think this would be a great example. You just said a quadriplegic who uses a wheelchair or who's wheelchair bound is what you said.
Oh, okay.
And there may be some people who prefer to say, oh, I'm a person who happens to be quadriplegic, who happens to use a wheelchair. And so when we see, because we use language that prefaces that, right? Mm-hmm. When we see somebody as a wheelchair, as opposed to a person who uses a wheelchair, like suddenly those two things are separate and we can just have a conversation with a person.
Yeah.
Can I share with you a really great story of when I met Emily?
Yeah.
I met Emily at a conference I was speaking at. I'm a professional speaker, and I was speaking at a conference, and I met Emily, and she held out her hand to shake my hand, and she doesn't have a hand.
Oh.
Her arm doesn't have a hand on it. It just ends at her wrist. And I went, okay. And I shook her hand, and I didn't make it weird. And she came up to me after, and she's like, thanks for not making that weird.
So what did she hold out to you then?
Her arm.
Her arm. And you just shook her arm.
I shook her arm at her wrist. Uh-huh. Was it strange? Well, yeah, it was the first time I had done that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm.
It is different and, maybe uncomfortable for some people when they're trying something new. Heck, when I try something new, it's uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
But in reality, on the other side of that discomfort is actually a whole other perspective waiting for me.
Right. I really appreciate that. And I'm stuck in what I know.
Sure you are.
So even your Zoom thing says she and her, and I know a number of younger people who are theys. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand what I don't know. Mm. And so I'm trying to learn. And that's the whole point. I'm so happy about this conversation. It's really choking me up because it's all everybody's just trying to express themselves and be who they are genuinely. And judgment is almost accidental. It's just what I grew up with, what I know, what I think I know.
Maybe judgment is default, but I wouldn't say it's accidental.
Okay.
And because it's default, it's automatic. Mm-hmm. The thing to do, and this is for anyone who's listening, because you are not alone.
Yeah, no, I want to have this conversation.
When I was a camp director, I hired people who were transgender and non-binary and gender fluid. And I was like, how do we do this at an overnight camp?
Oh.
There are no rules about this.
Oh, right.
When you know what you don't know, you then have to decide if it's going to be something you take on and learn about. And I think there's this misconception, Hara, that we have to take on and learn everything about it. And in reality, we don't. Mm-hmm. That said, we need to go to people who have great resources. Have you ever seen those videos on YouTube where people are given the glasses that allow them to see all the colors of the rainbow when they're colorblind?
Oh, yes.
They know they're missing something.
Yeah.
But until those glasses were available, they didn't know what.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
they expose themselves to color by putting on these glasses, which most times is the most phenomenal experience. I think one of the best ones I ever saw was a gentleman who was deaf, and he also was colorblind. As I'm watching this video of this gentleman who's colorblind and deaf, and he's expressing how excited he is. I mean, it was just so neat. It felt like such an intimate moment. As I think about when we know something, we have the opportunity to do better, why not take that opportunity?
Right. Yes. I totally appreciate that. You're very careful with your words. I listened to an interview you sent me where you asked the host whether she would prefer African American or Black. And I've never heard anybody ask that question. Also, I've never thought beyond it. That's also interesting to me. So I appreciate that you're very careful. It's hard to know what's right, though.
There's a difference between careful, like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake.
Yes, I don't think that.
And no, an intentional, like, how would you like to be addressed?
Right. I see.
When I own that I want to be responsible for creating a warm and welcoming place for somebody, I have to look at what do I need to do to create that? Well, in that case, I mean, I'm Canadian. She's American. We don't really use the term African American in Canada. And when I say we, I'm referring to my close friends that I know and people who are beyond my circle who are Black, but not necessarily of African descent. I think of one of my oldest friends. I asked him one day, I mean, this was probably, 15 years ago, before these, conversations were something that people were like, okay with having. I said, Drew, what's the scoop here? And he's like, oh my God, thank you for asking. He's like, first of all, I'm not African. And secondly, I'm not American. Don't call me that.
Yeah.
So it actually was a disempowering thing that mostly white people were doing to try and make him feel comfortable without asking him what would make him feel comfortable.
Right.
That's us trying to make ourselves feel better, whether it's in the context of race or disability or what, instead of being a stand for, hey, when you're in my space, I want you to feel comfortable. What can I do to help you feel comfortable?
I really just love that you're bringing my attention to things that I'm not necessarily thinking about. So that's why I'm mentioning it, because that was really an aha moment for me. I loved it.
Yeah. And it's the same as, I mean, you've already brought up, like, I have she, her on my Zoom profile. And I do that not because I'm trans or because I think that somebody is going to misgender me, but because I think about the people I know who are trans and I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to know I'm a safe person to talk to.
I see.
I'm setting up that there is an expectation that in my space, people who are trans are welcome.
It's beautiful. I love that. I never thought of it that way. And I'm so glad we brought that up. Did you grow up in a traditional family?
Traditional being, do I have two parents who are opposite genders?
Yes, that was the question. But also, like, you're very open and obviously to new ideas. Were they very open to ideas? Were they, I don't know what I keep going back. What was your childhood like that made you you?
So I don't think it was my childhood, although I think that was part of it. There have been points in my life where I choose the next version of me that I want to be. And then I take steps to become that person. And so who I am is not accidental and it's not passive. And I still make mistakes and want to be the next version of Twist. Going back to your question about my childhood, I have a mother and a father. They have been married nearly 40 years, 40 years next month. I have a younger brother. He serves in the Army. I'm very proud. And I grew up with very liberal parents. Interestingly, though, when I was in middle school, around the time that I started working with kids with special needs, a friend invited me to youth group where I heard that if I didn't accept Jesus and believe all the things, that I would be going to hell forever. And I spent the next several years being paranoid and angry that my parents wouldn't listen to me, that they were going to hell.
Yeah.
Ironically, I was an evangelical homophobic Christian.
Oh, that is ironic.
Yeah, for a long time, for a long time. I stopped going to church when I was probably about 18. Interestingly, I have a female partner and we met in a church.
Oh, also interesting.
Not going to church. One of our business networking groups was held in a church.
You met in a church building.
In a church building. Yeah.
That's funny.
You know, we always have a good laugh about that. But I mean, did I grow up with a traditional family? I suppose so. But my parents, like my mom went to a gay wedding in the 70s before it was legal.
Oh, cool.
And one of the stories that she tells is one of my favorite. And that is she went to one of the people who was getting married and said, what do I do if a woman hits on me? Because my mom's like as straight as an arrow. And the person looked at her and said, well, what would you do if a man hit on you and you weren't interested? And she was like, oh, right. You know,
right.
Say, I'm not interested.
I always think it's funny when they do that. They show that, like, you know, the guys are scared they're going to get hit on. Like, well, you're not that cute. Also, you know, who says you're going to get hit on by a gay guy?
And if you do, okay.
Right. It's just a person. Right.
They're just a person. Right.
Of course. Like for some reason, my mind can go there. Mm-hmm. Well, I really just so appreciate how intentional you are. And I'm going to change. I'm going to be the next version of me is going to be way more intentional than it has been.
I think that cancel culture has got to go. Cancel culture creates fear. There is a certain time at which if someone is unwilling to be open, that we can say, I don't want to have a relationship with you. But there's also a way to really gently teach people. And so, you know, this is one of those moments. And I would love everyone to learn from this. And it's not that they are a they, it's a person whose pronouns are they, them. That's it. It's these little things that can really help us see a partner before we see their gender.
Right.
I hope that that's also helpful for you.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you have been doing a lot of investment in yourself, I would assume. How do you get your growth? Do you have coaches? Do you read books? What do you do to better yourself?
I think that the best way for me to better myself, yes, books for sure. And books by lesser known authors, especially because lesser known authors often have a perspective that people don't want to consider or that is less popular. Mm-hmm. Desmond Cole wrote a book called The Skin We're In. Sally Hogshead is always one of my favorites. She literally wrote the book on fascination. So her personality tests are not how you see the world. It's how the world sees you so that you can live into that best version of yourself and get as far as you can, attracting people in a way that's unique to you. Mm-hmm. 21 things you may not have known about the Indian Act, or 21 things you don't know about the Indian Act. I apologize, I can't remember the exact title. And I think the other way that I have become this better version of myself, I love consuming video content. I want to watch interviews, especially, and interviews that are made by millennials. Millennials are willing to talk about things that boomers are not. As a general rule, that is true. It doesn't mean it's hard and fast. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things I struggle with is like, I have like secondary embarrassment. So if somebody's embarrassed on a screen, I'm like, oh, I can't watch this. I'm really embarrassed, you know? And so getting really comfortable with being willing to put myself out there and learn. Mm-hmm. I am not comfortable with discomfort. I get that people think that's a thing. For me, that isn't true. The comfortable is I am willing to be uncomfortable as I learn about this. Mm-hmm. So yes, books, video, but really like just talking to people about their experience and not expecting that they will necessarily do that for free. So if I have questions about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in my business, my expectation is that I will pay somebody who is a DEI expert to help me with specific things in my business. I do not expect them to do it for free. Mm-hmm. You know, I also really think about the irony of some things. Just because somebody is Black or African-American or Asian or brown, if that's how you identify, just because somebody is not white doesn't make them a DEI expert. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, don't you know that they have other really, really great things to talk about? Why are we looking at someone who is Black or African-American and saying, oh, your skin's not white, so you should know all about what I'm talking about?
Yeah, totally. What do you do for work?
So I'm a professional speaker.
About what?
Mostly marketing.
Oh, interesting.
I have the ability to come up with marketing on the spot for people that I've never met. I also speak about the ability to build relationships, that we need to understand that different relationships are for different things, and they don't have to be icky or hard or gross. If we understand that, especially in business, relationships are mutually strategic.
Right.
We have a team of like 12 people. We work together to create online courses and social media and workshops and all sorts of things for other online entrepreneurs.
Awesome. I feel so, what do I feel? I'm so overwhelmed with our conversation and thankful for it and emotional about it. And I appreciate you so much. And I'm so glad you did this interview with me and you taught me so much today. So I just wanted to thank you. And you beautifully answered all my questions and brought it full circle for me. I don't even have to do anything. Just have to listen to you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation that people want to have, but don't know where to start.
That is my goal. I like having hard conversations, even when they make me overwhelmed and teary. And it is a beautiful thing to talk about what's hard to talk about. I really, really, really loved this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
One of the ways I feel like I'm really growing is getting to do these interviews. I feel so honored that people are sharing so much time with me and their hearts. And I just learned so much. I'm just so happy that this is what I'm spending some time and energy on.
This is pretty special. I appreciate it. This was a really special interview.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye.